Hey, check out this awesome fan drawing at _creator___ made for us. It's the cutest little gorp I've ever seen, but I can smell him through the picture. Ew. Also, if you guys have your own projects and you need some royalty-free music, my music channel has some tracks for you to download. Just click that link in the description. Here are some samples. Now, let's begin today's scary, allegedly true stories. Our topic for this episode is monsters seen at nighttime. Oh, I've already got the heebly-jeeblies. Remember, if you've got a story of your own and you want it narrated, first you have to send it to us at darkstories.org. Now, let's do this. The Leer, from C.T. Flaska. Falling asleep has always been a problem ever since I was young. I thought what had happened back then was a dream, but only just recently was I reminded that it was very real. When I was 10, I would often lay awake in bed thinking about the day that I'd just had, or the challenges the next day might bring. I spent nights watching the lights dance on my bedroom wall as cars went by, or glancing around my room at the few toys I had. I would get lost in thought, thinking about what kind of adventures they would get into if they had come to life like in that one movie. The house I grew up in was located on the corner of a less traveled intersection. One streetlight lit the four-way. The light was old but bright, shining through my window soothingly, giving my room an orange tint like a dim melody. The streetlight would flicker every once in a while, causing the collection of bugs around its bulb to disperse only to return once their oddity of light came back into existence. The nighttime setting was memorable, comforting, until that thing showed up. One night after crawling out of bed from pure boredom, I sat on the edge of the footboard watching cars go by. I counted the passing vehicles while getting lost in thought. One car, maybe two all night, but sometimes none at all. A few hours passed without a car whizzing through the intersection. The light flickered, and when the bulb regained power, I saw it standing directly beneath it. The night air went still, and the noisy insects went silent. The dark figure stood frozen, but not in a natural way, not in any way that seemed comfortable. Oblong limbs on a cracked and deformed body. The figure was so dark, it was hard to be sure if what I was looking at was a person or a shadow. Climbing over the end of my bed, I crept over to my window, never removing my gaze from the being. I couldn't tell, but I think it knew I was watching it. It wasn't long after I reached my bedroom window that I knew something was not right. The dark figure under the streetlight had moved. My eyes narrowed and I focused on the abnormal being. I studied it. I noticed it was breathing, not slowly, but fast and erratically. Almost as if it was out of breath, or as if it had just exhausted stamina sprinting a long distance. Its arms moved slightly up and down with every sporadic breath. At this moment, I realized it had moved again. Slightly, but it was definitely not in the same position as when I had first seen it. It was hard to be sure. The being was so dark under the light that it was too hard to focus on what was its torso or limb. I continued to stare at it, my eyes just above the window frame. I was so focused on the strange creature in the street that I jumped when I heard a noise in my own home. Quickly, I turned around toward my bedroom door. One of my parents, or maybe my brother, had just gotten up to use the restroom down the hall. After assessing the situation, I turned my head back to the newfound problem in the road, and I noticed the figure had moved again. It was now obviously staring at me. I knew this because I could see its eyes now. I froze. Its eyes were small but bright. They were piercing white sparkles so tiny, they almost seemed to get lost in the black void of its body. I knew for some reason that it wasn't just looking in my direction. It was looking me over. It was staring directly at me. After a few minutes, I decided I needed to leave. I had to run and get someone to show, to ask someone, what in the world is that in the road? I slowly began to stand out of the view of the window, but I didn't take my eyes off the figure. It was at this moment that I realized the game I was in. Before I made my way out of the window frame, I blinked, and upon opening my eyes from a single blink, the figure had shifted. I blinked again, and it moved again. That thing out there was moving any time I wasn't looking. It had by now taken a full step in my direction. The dark figure looked excited, like it knew I'd finally figured out the horrific rules of its game. Its frantic breathing grew more intense. This is crazy. This isn't happening, is it? I asked myself. My heart began to pound and my breathing quickened too. No, what's happening? I thought. I was in disbelief of what was happening. I held my breath as I stood in my bedroom, shutting my eyes. I thought to myself, I'll count to 5. It must be a dream after all. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4. Suddenly, I heard a crunch like a tree branch snapping. I opened my eyes. The figure was no longer at the streetlight. I was overwhelmed with adrenaline, with panic. I bolted from my bed and dove under the blankets. I was so scared, I forgot what I'd just proven to myself. I had to look at it. I had to look before it got even closer. As I shuffled the covers, I heard quickly approaching footsteps. They sounded unreal. The steps were quickly growing louder and were hitting so hard, I swear I could hear the dirt and sticks outside being thrown into the air behind it. My head rose above the blankets, and sure enough, the footsteps stopped. I stared at the window. The only visible thing was the intersection lit by the light pouring down from the streetlight above. Although the figure wasn't in my sight, I knew it was there, somewhere in the dark. I sat in my bed staring through the window in the bedroom. I didn't move. I would blink once in a while, and when I did, I could always hear just a bit of movement. I knew the longer I blinked, the more distance between us the creature would cover. This nightmare lasted for hours. Every time I was tempted to yawn, I would fight the reflex, fight it with every fiber of my being. After what felt like an eternity, the sun rose. A soft light began to wash over my neighborhood. I decided to get out of the bed and to move to the window to attempt to locate the thing from the road. I knew it was out there, but where? I slowly approached the window and was given a much broader view of my yard leading up to the intersection. Even though I was looking for the creature, it still made me jump when I laid eyes on it once again. There it was in greater detail. The blood left my face, hands, and feet as soon as I saw how terrifying it truly was. The thing was in a paused motion. Must have been about 7 feet tall and was perched on one leg as if frozen mid-stride. One of its dangly arms was open-palmed on a tree it had been passing, as if it was going to use it to push off of and increase its speed. The other hand was open and clawing right in my direction. It was now 20 feet from my window, whereas in the road it had been about 45 feet. The creature's skin was black, wrinkled, the texture of dried leather. Other areas of its body were made up of random patches of black mangled fur. It was tall and gangly and unbelievably skinny. The creature looked as if it had been malnourished, starving and desperate, and its sights were set right on me. Every time I moved even slightly, I noticed its breathing would intensify. It was excited, as if any moment I would turn and lose eye contact with it, and it could continue its hunt, its rampage towards me. I remembered its piercing eyes and decided to look at them in the small glimpse of daylight I now had. As I lifted my gaze towards its head, the streetlight suddenly flickered. The sunrise was causing the light sensor to diminish the power to the bulb, and it was shutting off. I was tired and not thinking when I flashed my eyes to the light, which I noticed had just went out. My eyes hit the streetlight. The light went out, and I then heard a low growling coming from that creature. The noise it emitted was low and scratchy, and it sent shivers down my spine. I quickly relocated my eyes back toward the creature, and it was gone. I didn't move for quite some time. The creature had vanished, but the last time that happened, it had covered nearly 25 feet in a matter of seconds, so my guard was up. I scanned the yard intensely. I was shaking. I could feel the cool morning breeze hit my cold, sweat-covered body. Minutes had passed and still no change to the absence of the being. A car passed through the intersection. I hadn't even noticed if cars had passed at all since the thing appeared. I still couldn't find it. I was unsure that the thing had vanished at all. Then there was a beep, beep, beeping. I jumped and shot my head around so as to evaluate the sudden noise in my room. It was just my alarm. I threw my head back toward the window. There was still no sign of it. Had the creature finally disappeared? Was it unable to be in the daylight? It vanished as the streetlight went out, so it must be gone. Maybe it can only pound. There was a knocking at my door. I gasped. "Turn off your alarm. It's annoying. Come on, dude." It was just my brother. I sighed with relief and mouthed an almost silent, "Yeah, sorry." Knowing that someone else was within reach, I felt that I could take my eyes off the yard, so I turned to silence my alarm. I felt uneasy. I felt alone and unsure. I sat in bed and covered myself, attempting to regain composure. The day went by, but many questions clouded my head. Was I going to see it again? Could anyone else see it? I told my brother what happened, and he just chuckled at me. Same reaction from my parents, too. Their conclusion was that I had a vivid imagination, so no more scary movies or I'd have more nightmares. This was my situation to handle on my own. To my dismay, it was under the streetlight multiple times after that night. Sometimes it didn't show, but that didn't mean I was just going to bed like nothing happened. I mean, there was no instruction manual to this thing. All I knew was I had to stare at it, blink sparingly, and under no circumstances nod off. I made that mistake once, and it nearly cost me my life. After a few nights of this, I had a good system going. I would blink about 20 times per hour, so by sunrise, it would only have made it a few steps, which at that point was only the beginning of the lawn. The system worked so well that I became bored. Boredom led to drowsiness. One night, I repeated what I'd done most every night for a couple of weeks. I didn't even remember shutting my eyes, though. I only recall jumping awake to the sound of the screen bursting off the window. My eyes met the creature as it was now frozen in place. One foot on the bottom of my window, and a hand at either side of it, as if it were ready to launch itself at me. Its breathing changed from fast and frantic to slow inhales and exhales, calm, like it was sure it would finally get to me. Huge gnarled teeth and unblinking white eyes had expressed anger and yearning. I stared for the remaining hours, and once that sunrise hit, it vanished once again. This nightmare lasted about a month, and then it just stopped showing up entirely. I stayed awake as much as possible the next year after that, until I slowly began to gain a normal life back. 5 years passed, then 10. Now I'm 32, sitting at my desk writing this post at about 6:30 a.m., with a cold cup of tea to keep me company. I'm submitting this experience everywhere I can, in an attempt to reach out to someone who may have been this thing. I need to know if others are seeing what I'm seeing, and if they have any answers for me. I'm asking, because I think it's back. Last night, it managed to climb up 4 stories to my apartment's balcony. I accidentally spotted it on my way back from the kitchen with a hot cup of tea. It was only just getting its other leg over the railing outside the sliding door. That freaking look on its face, it almost had me. If you know what this is, comment below, because I don't think I can do this again. Possible creature stalking. From StarChaser_13. It was late summer, and I was around 5 or 6. It was nighttime. I had decided to go behind my old home, which I'd lived in for basically my entire life until just recently, and I saw it then. The biggest canine you could imagine. Its fur was silvery brownish, and it seemed to stand around 5 feet. As it walked on all 4s, it was about 5 feet tall. The most notable thing about it were its eyes, which reflected yellow in the moonlight. It reminded me of a wolf, but I didn't think we had wolves out here. I'd never seen one in real life. Mind you, there wasn't a lot of light in the backyard at the time. This wolf had a stench to it too, a disgusting tone of decay that invaded my senses as it just walked by me. When I looked closer, I noticed that the wolf had no tail. I kid you not. It looked like it had never had a tail at any point. I'd ran back to my mom, who's outside. I pulled her by the hand to show her, but when we returned to the back of the house, it was gone. There were no traces of its footsteps either. It was as if I had pretended the whole thing. She thought I had just had a wild imagination since I was a young child. Turns out this would not be my only encounter with this bizarre creature. After I turned 13, I came across a single bare human footprint. This was much further away from the house, the same house I mentioned before. Plus, it was in the middle of freshly fallen snow. The footprint was so large, even my mom was thinking it must have been a Bigfoot, or the world's tallest man had walked by barefoot in the snow. I remember looking at her square in the eyes and telling her, "This isn't Bigfoot, Mom. It's not human either. It's something worse." I pointed back at the track, calling attention to a detail she had missed. "See," I said, "there's only one single footprint, and it's not followed or surrounded by any others at all." I said this in a serious tone, with a little bit of my fear leaking out underneath. She again thought I was being imaginative. I was older, sure, but I was still just a teenager. A year later, I woke up in the middle of the night needing to use the bathroom. When I walked into the restroom, the window was open. This was normal for us because it was midsummer, and it was a good way to make the room smell a bit better. When I walked in, I heard male voices. Voices that sounded like gibberish, almost like they were just noises to create sounds that only mimic the way humans talk. Then I realized that these voices sounded monotone, like something passively mimicking a human conversation. And then I heard it, a crunching sound, followed by another and another. These heavy footsteps got closer and closer. I need to say something about the land, and that's that there are trees separating all the different properties from each other, and beginning across the road, there is around 200 square miles of thick state game land. Those footsteps were as heavy as a bear, but with the footsteps, the voices got closer too, as whatever it was beginning to draw nearer to me. I forgot about using the bathroom. Instead, I was doing my best not to run away so that I could listen to this thing. Then, all at once, the sounds go quiet. I could hear the faintest breathing of the thing from about 20 feet away. That's how quiet it was. It knew I was there. Perhaps it had heard my heavy breathing first. I then ran silently to my room to grab my hatchet and a serrated knife that I had gotten for Christmas. I stayed up all night at my bedroom window, staring out, scared that it would come back for me. Around a year later, I just got home from the store. It's a warm fall night. As I'm walking, I see what looks like a large black dog sitting right behind the car. The house has a spotlight for the driveway that stays on at night. This dog, or whatever it may have been, was staring at me dead in the eyes. Its eyes were exactly like the wolf's eyes that I saw a long time ago, reflecting yellow. Well, not exactly reflective, but actually glowing yellow. The dog was sitting in the shadow of the car, as if it thought it was hiding from the light, watching me. That's when I noticed what it looked like. It was a very emaciated figure, with a super dark black color, while sitting on its hind legs. It wasn't like a normal dog. It was sitting with its front legs off the ground. Now, ever since I had heard those voices that night, I kept my hatchet and knife by the front door. I ran in, ready to grab them, freaking out about this creature. Of course, my mom was putting the groceries away when I saw this thing, and when I told her what I was looking at, she wouldn't listen to me and said that my imagination was running wild again. I glared at her and slowly approached the area where the dog creature was, my hatchet now in my hands. When I made it to about 7 yards away from the thing, the two of us still making eye contact with one another, it sped off insanely fast toward the fenced-off area in my neighbor's yard, disappearing. In the months that followed, I tended to find a lot of game tracks around the house, mainly deer and rabbit. At the time, I had 3 cats of my own who hated going out at night. Around this time of year, it was snowing again, so the tracks were in the snow and more obvious to detect. Well, one evening, I went out to go check the mail. It was around 20 minutes before full darkness, so I could still see clearly enough. I found these tracks that terrified me. It was long and thin, and it only had 3 toes. It appeared to have been pacing back and forth in this spot for some time. I often go out with my friends on their hunting trips, so I'm no stranger to animal tracks. I realized that these tracks were no animal that I had ever seen. Or maybe I had, and it just wasn't a normal creature. I sprinted back up the driveway of pure ice that's on an upward slope, then literally dove into my house, afraid that the thing that made those tracks was still close by. That night, I had the most heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching moment. It was around 2 a.m., and I heard this noise that sounded like a girl screaming in agonizing pain, and not too long after that, a man's voice, one of pure agony, joined her and harmonized with it. I found it difficult to sleep that night. Luckily, right after I turned 15, in May of 2019, we were able to move out of that house, but that summer still somehow turned out to be terrifying. I went to a summer camp, a police camp, and me and some other girls in our cabin had heard the exact same screaming, wailing sounds out there. The other cabin at the same campsite had heard what sounded like something walking on their roof and scratching at the walls and door. This happened 2 nights out of the 5 nights we were at that camp. And what's even weirder, maybe even creepier, is that one of the girls I camped with had a nosebleed every time the screaming began. Maybe it was just a stress thing. A little bit after that, I found out that I was part Navajo and Cherokee. I remembered I had heard something called Yi Not Lu Shiai, or Skinwalker in Navajo. I'd read about them, and my world turned upside down. So nowadays, when I go out at night in suburban areas, I'm terrified, but I feel perfectly normal and fine in the woods. Now all I know is that I'm being stalked by something that I'm scared will see me, not as its observer, but as prey, and that one day it may try to attack me. Recently at my new house, I had suddenly begun smelling a scent of decay strongly, and I'm afraid that that thing has come back, that it knows where I've moved to. I've also heard something walking around the new house outside, and my door keeps opening and shutting on its own. There's no draft, there's nothing that can close the door like that. And I've also heard something calling my name in my mother's voice on 3 separate occasions. In fact, my mother herself had heard me calling for her on 3 occasions. Something is toying with me and my family, playing with our fear. Even at our new home, I don't feel safe. I feel on edge all the time. I'm afraid, and I'm not scared to admit it. This thing is very real, and it's screwing with my mind. Beware of the unknown things in the dark. This is a real warning for those who live in central Pennsylvania. This thing is fast, and very much has the ability to hurt you. Stay safe, and watch yourself in the woods. Blood in the Snow, from Ron R. It was one of the worst winters we had in a couple of years, along with being one of the scariest ones I'll never forget for the rest of my life. It was a mid-December night, and snow was coming down like someone was dumping cotton balls off the roof. I was sitting in my room watching TV when a snowball flew right into my window. My room is on the 2nd floor of the house. I got up to look out the window, thinking it was one of my friends trying to get me to come outside. I peered through the blinds, only to see a dark figure standing in the backyard. Immediately, I knew it wasn't anyone that I knew. The figure was tall and lanky, wearing a long, dark coat that touched the ground. They also had a stovetop hat covering long, wiry hair. Concerned, I yelled for my dad to come and see what I was looking at. I met him at the bedroom door and took him to the window to show him what I'd seen. But when he got to the window, the figure was gone. He told me not to be silly and that I probably should go to bed now. Guess he thought I'd been up too late. I went ahead and went to sleep, trusting my dad was right. The next morning, I looked outside and screamed. My dad came running in to see what was wrong, because I've never done this before. He busted into my room and rushed to the window to see what I was looking at. He gasped at the sight of a mutilated chicken from next door, lying in our yard. Even stranger, there were no footprints in the fresh snow, just viscera, and the chicken ripped open and headless. For the next couple of days, I saw the dark figure again, each time in a different place in the yard, and each morning a new mutilated chicken where the man had stood the day before. Fed up, my dad called the cops to come out and tell them what was going on. Knowing it'd be hard to believe, my dad took pictures of the chickens each morning to show the cops. The sergeant had an officer park in our driveway undercover for the next couple of days, and of course, as it usually goes with these stories, nothing happened. The next day, I was down in the living room when the doorbell chimed, but with all that was going on, I didn't open the door. I slowly walked to the door and looked out the peephole first. I fell back, dropping to the ground and trembling. That same figure was standing outside my front door. Even though the sun was shining bright and reflecting off the snow, I still could not see the figure's dark face. I just sat there trembling for hours, not knowing what to do. My dad came home later that evening with me still looking like a huge lump on the floor. He looked at me and asked, "The heck are you sitting on the floor like that?" I told him what I'd seen. So knowing what normally happens, the next morning my dad sat by the front door with his 12 gauge, just waiting for that thing that only looks like a man to come back. At 3 a.m. we heard a pounding on the door. Of course, my dad had gone to bed by then. But as soon as he heard that, he ran to the door and yanked it open, pointing his 12 gauge at whatever was out there. But it was no one. But there was more blood in the snow. But it wasn't from a chicken this time around. What the man used was our family dog. African Werewolf, from Jude H. This happened a while back. I live in Johannesburg, South Africa, and drive around to places quite a bit. I often take road trips to clear my head and get out of the big city. I hate the city. Too many people and way too busy. If you haven't been to Johannesburg, think New York, just smaller and less busy, but not by a big margin. But still, it's our capital in South Africa. On the day in question, I went to a farming and mining town called Klerksdorp, about 200 kilometers away from Johannesburg. It was a nice and peaceful drive. Nothing really happened. That night on the way back, my car started acting up, misfiring and cutting out. I pulled over, checking the spark plugs and battery leads. Where I stopped was in the middle of some cornfields by the road. It was pretty dark, but I could still see the clouds in the night sky. The moon wasn't out, so it was quite beautiful. I was thinking, man, where's my camera when I need it? In the distance, I can hear cattle and other farm animals roaming about. Wasn't really paying attention to it, though. I couldn't find the issue, and I phoned my friend to come help me. While I waited for him, I started getting the sense that I wasn't alone out here. In South Africa, we have a lot of farm attacks, where guys use military-grade jammers to jam cell service. I started getting nervous, looking around and looking for anyone who might be wanting to attack me. From the corner of my eye, I see something moving in the cornfield. I think, great, my mom's gonna be upset. You see, I look after my parents and support them, so if something bad happens to me, it's not gonna be good. I looked at my phone and still had service, so I phoned my friend again, asking him where he was and how long he would be, telling him I don't think I'm alone and that he needs to hurry. Half an hour goes past with this thing stalking me just out of reach of my eyesight, but I can hear it. My friend gets there at last and I manage to get my car fixed. As I walk him back to his car, we begin to hear snarling coming from our right. We both immediately think, that's a big dog. As we move off, I look to my right to see this shadow keeping pace with me. As I speed up, so does it. I slow down and it slows too. I phone my friend again and say, dude, punch it. We need to get out of here. All of a sudden, I see my friend swerve, narrowly missing something in the road. And standing there is this massive dog-looking thing, towering over my car. I swerve off the road and just barely miss it. We pass it, and I look in the mirror and see it standing there, almost like it's telling me to never come back. I think I broke down in its territory, and it simply wanted me gone, and I listened. Unidentified, from San. This happened to my friend in 2011. She was walking alone one night on a wooded path. She was walking her dog at the time, and she said it was around 8 p.m. Now, this wasn't unusual for my friend, as she said she walked the path often in the evening. She said she adored the scenery and sunset. Usually, she brought her dog along just in case there were any creeps out late. Now, on this particular October evening, she was running late, and she said that the time was close to 9 p.m. This made her finish up the first path, and she had the decision to turn around and go back to her car. She went with that. She was only walking back for about 2 minutes when she heard crunching noises behind her. At first, she thought nothing of it, until she sensed that something was following her. She said that she was on the edge of her seat, so she turned around and was shocked to see that it wasn't a person that was following her. It was some creature, apparently 9 feet tall, with pale, droopy skin and eyes that were sunken in. At the sight of it, she almost had a heart attack. And then the thing made a deafening screech, which caused her to bolt right out of there. The moment she made it back to her car and opened the door, she heard the thing screech again. She drove off as fast as her RPMs would let her. After that day, she found a different trail to use. Why would you even go out after dark? Your eyes aren't meant to work well in the dark, so it's basically suicide. So just don't go out after dark, guys, unless you have a small star in your pocket to shine the way. Or else you're gonna get eaten by the boogeyman. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. If you want to support the show further, check the links below, where you can donate on my Patreon or shop on my merch store. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous episode, titled, I found human remains in my grandfather's cavern, and I have the photos to prove it. Straight Savage says, I just love this channel, period. Well, you ended your sentence with an exclamation point, but I trust you. Brock Bernard says, yes, time to turn off the lights in my man cave and get creeped out. Sitting in the man cave to listen to a grandfather cavern. Nice. Greatest Ever says, how can you snitch on your own grandpa? Well, if your grandpa's burying strange people, there's something off about him. Joey Merrill says, ADD high horse dismounted. And I give your dismount a 10 out of 10. And Rain says, good time to move to a private island with 10 dogs. Yeah, that would work, but good luck affording it. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are on the way soon. So stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my patrons who continue to donate. They're great people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.